Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. Today I am back in California at Yota1 Performance in Riverbank, and what we're going to show you how to do today is rebuild a W series manual transmission that was found on 3rd gen early pickups, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd gen 4Runners, 1st gen Tacomas, and T100s. There's lots of different models of the W series transmissions. We're going to be focusing on the W46, the W55, the W56, and the W59. For this video, we're going to show the teardown and rebuild of a W56B, and the W56 has models A through E, but we're going to do our best to show you some of the differences that you'll find in those different models of the same series. And if you have questions after the end of this video, you can certainly ask them in the comments and we'll do our best to answer them for you. Also, you can put a call into Yota1 Performance, ask to talk to Nick, who's the guru on these rebuilds, and he'll help you out to the best of his ability. Now, when you get done watching the entire rebuild of this transmission and you feel it's above your ability, you can choose to send your transmission to Yota1 Performance and they will do a high quality rebuild for you and send it back to you. So even though you don't live in the Riverbank area of California, don't let that deter you from using Yota1 Performance to rebuild your transmission. If you're wondering, how would I get my transmission over to Yota1 Performance if I was in a different part of California or a different state entirely, Yota1 sells these nice wooden crates that will protect the transmission. So it could go one of two ways. They might have one in stock ready to ship for you, and then when you get the rebuilt transmission, you just simply put yours that you pulled out of your rig into that crate and you send it back to them to satisfy the core charge. And then also, if you are particular and you don't want anybody else's transmission, you want your particular one rebuilt, then you simply go on their website, you order the crate, they send it to you, you package the transmission in the crate, send it to them, they rebuild it, and they send it back in the same crate. So there's many options of how you can get your transmission built. If you decide that after watching this video series, it's within your ability, you're willing to invest in the tools necessary, and press, pullers, that sort of thing, then Yota1 can be your parts supplier. They'll have all the necessary parts, bearings, seals, shafts, whatever, gears, and they can get you those parts at a fair price very quickly. With all that said, we are going to get started on rebuilding this W56B manual transmission. One final thing that I want to cover before we get started with the teardown of this W56B transmission is this series is going to be broken down into 3 parts. Part 1 is going to be the teardown of the transmission. Part 2 is going to be the reassembly of the transmission with all the new parts, bearings, seals, synchros, and any other parts that were found that can't be reused, like the shafts, gears, the sliders, or the hubs. And then part 3 is going to be an optional video for you to watch, and that video is going to be made for those of you that have a W series transmission that is covered in this video, but it's not the exact one we're working on. You're going to see some differences in the parts, and Nick is going to do his level best to show you those differences so you don't get confused when you're tearing down your transmission and putting it back together. With all that said, let's get started with the teardown of this W56B manual transmission.
All right, here we go. W56B. We know that because of the serial number right here. Okay, see there's an 8-digit number there. The last 5 digits of that are a serial number. We don't really care about that. The first 3 is the date code, and the way these work, if you haven't seen other videos where we've explained this, but the very first number is the last digit of the year. The next 2 digits are the month. So this transmission was produced December of '86, And we know it's not 76 because they didn't make this transmission in 76. And we know it's not 96 because they also didn't make it in 96. The only way this can have a 6 would be 86. Not true for all the Toyotas, but for W series, that is true.
What do the other numbers? That's just the lot number of the build?
Yeah, the last 5 is the serial number that's specific to this exact unit. And that serial number, there's really nothing you can do with it. We use it just to identify a specific unit, but there's nowhere on the internet that you can plug that in and get access to parts or anything like that. It's just a serial number. Before we tear this down, I'm just going to run through a few quick things. This is the front, this is the input shaft, the front bearing retainer. This is the front case. This is the rear case. This is the center plate. This center plate is steel. Most everything in a W56 is going to be a steel center plate, but you will see aluminum center plates in the 1985 units. I don't know exactly what month they quit doing the aluminum, but somewhere in 1985 they switched from aluminum center plate to steel. This one's steel. Anything 86 and on would always be a steel center plate.
And then Nick, this is obviously where the bell housing would be, right?
Yeah, the bell housing bolts here, there's really nothing special. There's 9 bolts. They're a 14 millimeter head, 10 millimeter thread, 45 millimeters long. There's 9 of them. No gasket, nothing special. There's these 2 dowel pins that you have to make sure are here. One there, one high, one low. Got to make sure those are on there. Bell housing locks onto the dowel pins. You put the 9 bolts in it, tighten it down, and that's that.
And if somebody was going to be sending you their transmission to be rebuilt, you prefer to have the bell housing off, correct?
Yeah, the bell housing has to be off. The transmission won't fit in the crate with the bell housing on it. We have bell housings for sale, so if you want a nice cleaned up, sandblasted, painted bell housing, nice and pretty to match your new transmission, we do have them. They're sold separately. There's no core charge, and those would be shipped in a separate box. They would include the nice zinc plated hardware to install it, but yeah, you would have to install the bell housing. And if you're sending your unit in, we wouldn't want the bell housing on it. This is the shifter plate. This is a new shifter plate kit that you can buy. Our units do not include that shifter plate. This is the reverse switch. Our units also don't include that. And if you're sending your unit in for rebuild, you would want to take this switch off. We do send you a new crush washer for it, but you'd want to retain this switch, take the top plate off, take the bell housing off, and then obviously the transfer case. So what you shipped into us would look exactly like this, minus this switch would not be in it. So let's go to the back of the transmission real quick. This would be a gear drive RF1A top shift transfer case. And I hear a lot of people say, hey, oh yeah, they share oil with the transmission, and they really don't. This is the transmission output seal. It seals onto the input shaft of the transfer case. So that's what keeps the transmission oil in the transmission. The transfer case is open faced and there is no seal. So the oil from the transfer case flows through the 2 front bearings that are exposed, and it uses this entire cavity back here is transfer case oil. But because of this seal, the transmission oil stays in the transmission, and the transfer case oil kind of stays in the transfer case, even though it does flow into this cavity in the back of the transmission. And that's true for all W56s. When we get to talking about W59s, they use a chain drive T-case that has a seal, so this doesn't happen on a W59. That's only W56. The next thing that we'll talk about is the shifter tower. Again, our transmissions don't include it. You can purchase this if you want, or you can retain your existing plate. We do send you a new shifter bushing, and it's the nice plastic one, but the gasket, you can see it has these washers molded into it. That's how they are when they're new. Pretty good chance when you take yours off, those washers are gonna pop out of this, which is totally fine as long as you save all 6 of them. You can reuse this, put it back on with some silicone, and then push these washers back in place and put the top plate on it. That's totally fine as long as this is in good shape. You do want to have it though, because you can see how thick it is. So it does have an impact on the exact pivot of the shifter. So I'm sure it would work without this, but I would rather reuse an old ragged one than not have one at all. We do have these for sale by themselves, as well as the little paper gasket that goes up here underneath the shifter. That's a W56 A and B only thing. The W56C right after this, so from 1989 through 92, they have something very similar to this. And then in 93, they got rid of this and it's just silicone. This is only A and B, so 1985 through 1988 or 89 in a 4Runner. This kit comes with the refurbished plate, new hardware, new genuine Toyota baffle gasket, and the genuine Toyota shifter base gasket. I think that's enough on that. Okay, so now we're gonna take the cases off of this. There's really no real specific order for the most part. I'm just gonna kind of do it the way I do it. I'm gonna take off this reverse switch. It has this wire on it, so if you don't have a sensor socket, the easiest way is just a crescent wrench, and they're usually not very tight. A good bump gets it off. Spin that thing out of there, and then notice there's an aluminum crush washer. A lot of times that crush washer ends up glued to the case, or sometimes it ends up stuck to the sensor. They're usually pretty greasy like this, and it's hard to even tell it's there. We got lucky on this one because it made it easy on us, but that's really important. There needs to be one and only one. And then there's this little bracket right here held on with a 12mm bolt. That's supposed to hold that wire from that reverse switch. Okay, so now we're gonna take out the drain plug. This particular one is a 17mm. A lot of these are 24mm, but I'm gonna get this out of here. You can retain this if you want. We replace them all the time. So now we got that out of there. Now I'm gonna move on to these plungers that are on the side of the transmission here. There's one on each side. These are a 24mm socket. You can see these things, they're like spring loaded. These ones have an aluminum crush washer on them. See, one of them got stuck on there. Well, that's very important to have those on there. It sets the depth. Now this is the transmission drain plug. Same thing, it's gonna have an aluminum crush washer on it. Should be a 24mm. So this one, you can see there's some pretty good metal paste on there. Pretty normal. We always recommend replacing these.
You replace the drain plugs?
We do, and the fill plug.
Okay.
You don't have to, you can clean them out, but they're not that expensive. It's a lot easier just to replace them. Then we're gonna move on to the bearing retainer. This is 7 12mm bolts. So this transmission should have had a paper gasket here. That gasket goes away in, I think 1992 is when Toyota switched to silicone here and at the center plates. No more gaskets after that. This one's been off before. You can see this really awesome blue nasty silicone here. So a dead blow, we'll pop that off. And there's our input seal. You can see our input seal here is totally shredded. In fact, here's the spring that used to be part of that seal. This is because we just found the main failure of this transmission, which is pretty common on these well, really all of them, but W series in particular. See how half of the balls are gone?
Whoa. Yeah, where'd they go? They're inside the trans?
Yeah.
So that input bearing is known to go bad?
Yes.
We say that's the Achilles heel of these transmissions? That's the most problematic part?
I would say that is the most common failure in this transmission. So we've got this out, so we're gonna grab a heel bar or whatever we got, and we're gonna just real carefully pull this seal out. You need to be careful not to gouge the surface that the seal rides on, but this is a cast iron piece, so you don't have to be near as careful as you do with aluminum. But there's the input seal, and there's really nothing else to this. Somebody's got to get all that nasty silicone off, but we got people for that.
Yeah, you got employees to do that for you.
Exactly. So we're already right here in the front of the transmission, so we might as well go ahead and take off these snap rings right here. So this is the input bearing snap ring. You see there's two snap rings. There's one from the bearing to the case, and then there's one from the bearing to the shaft. And then it's the same here. There's one from the countershaft to the bearing and one from the bearing to the housing. So we'll go ahead and get all these snap rings off. That one doesn't want to come off, so we'll do it later. A lot of times when the bearing blows up like that, this one's either really hard to get off or you just can't get it off and you have to buy a new shaft and a new snap ring. But we got 3 of the 4 off, and we'll get that countershaft snap ring off once the shaft's removed. Okay, so now that we're done in the front, we're gonna move over here. We're gonna do some of these plugs all over the outside of this thing. I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 plugs. They're 6mm Allen socket on these. They really like to strip I highly recommend using one of these impact drivers. If you do, you definitely won't strip the plug. If you don't, pretty good chance you will. So now we got all those plugs loosened up with the impact driver, and now we're gonna zap them out and talk about what's behind each one of them. This one here in the back, this is gonna be the right-hand side of the transmission. There's nothing. This is just a passageway. I'm guessing that Toyota used for the oil system, but there's nothing behind there. So now this one, there's a roll pin behind here for the reverse interlock. We take them out just to get the transmissions perfectly clean. You don't necessarily have to take it out. You don't necessarily have to take that plug out either.
Yeah, there it is right there.
Yeah.
So you're just using your roll pin punch to knock that through.
Yep, roll pin punch. And we just let that roll pin fall inside the rear case. We'll get it after we take it apart. So now to the top. The first 3 plugs we took out are all the same. They're the small thread 6mm Allen head. So there's nothing behind this. That's an empty hole. We use that, but there's nothing in there right now. So now we go to the side of the transmission. So these 3 plugs are very similar. These 2 are the same. This one is not. And you'll be able to see the difference here. See how there's a step on the bottom of this plug right here and there's not on this one? This one is also the same. It has a step on it. Here's the reason why. If you look at this case, see how this hole here is down lower? These 2 are stepped up.
Oh, so they have to be a little bit deeper.
Yeah, see how the springs are way low in those? There's 3 springs and 3 balls right here. They're all 3 the same springs and balls. So since this case is higher here than it is here, right here they use the plugs with the step on them. So these 2 raised plug holes are the ones with the step. And this third one here, which is actually on the top of the transmission, is the one that does not have the step on it. So now we're going to take out all the springs and balls, just using a little magnet. Get these magnets on Amazon. And these are all 3 9.5mm balls. All 3 the same. So 3 balls, 3 springs, 3 plugs. 2 of the plugs are different. So now we're going to take out all 9 of these bolts that hold the cases together. I'm going to use a 1/2 inch drive, 14mm wobble socket. Works really good. So here we go.
So Nick, are all those the same length? You don't have to keep track of their position?
Correct. Yeah, there's 9 bolts. They're 10mm by 70mm long. All 9 of them are the same. The only difference you'll see is stuff like this. This one has the little wire thing on it. If you want to get these right back where they belong, take pictures before you take it apart. Our units don't come with those. You'll have to transfer those over from your old trans if you want to do that. And I get this call often. People wonder, is it okay to take the bolt out to put this wire tab on? And yes, it's definitely okay. There's 9 of these bolts and there's no silicone on them. There's no seal within the thread. The seal is at the main case. Totally fine to take a bolt out and put that wire tab on and put it back. One more thing, this 12mm bolt right here that holds the shift shoe to the shift rod needs to be removed. This is a special bolt that's specific to that. It has this large shank on it right here. Now we're ready to take the cases off of this thing. And the easiest way to do it is a dead blow hammer right here, and then a dead blow hammer up here. Look, you can see that one's already trying to come off.
Oh yeah, you're
Okay.
barely tapping that thing.
Yeah, that doesn't always happen like that.
Okay.
Or that. Okay, so now we're gonna pull this off. Once the cases are separated, you can just grab the shift shoe and throw that in the wash bucket. Now we can slide the rear case the rest of the way off. Now we can grab the shift rod. Now sometimes this is going to be hard to get apart because this input bearing failed. I find that when that happens, it kind of deforms the case around that bearing, And when that happens, sometimes it's hard to get that bearing out of the case. It's also hard to get the case back on the new bearing. So anytime there's an input bearing failure like this, my guys that tear them down will put a zip tie through these 2 holes, and that lets us know that those 2 holes need to be honed. We'll use our connecting rod hone, and we have a special fixture that's set up just for this, and we'll hone those 2 holes back to round so the front case will slide back on when we're reassembling the transmission. All right, now we got that off, we get to grab all of our slingshot ammo and put that to the side for future use. See how that bearing came apart? That's not the way it's supposed to happen. This bearing should still be all one piece right here. The case should have slid off of it, but that bearing failed pretty bad, so we'll have to knock that out. We're just gonna use a punch. So now we're gonna pull these dowel pins out of this front case. Don't really have to do it, but we do. We sandblast and surface all of them. We wanna be able to surface this, so that's why we remove these dowel pins.
That's a special service tool. That's a dowel pin remover.
Yep, that most people probably don't have.
They're not gonna have that.
No, but most people also aren't gonna be able to surface anything, so totally fine to just leave those dowels in. They're not hurting anything.
So how far into the case does that seat in? Like
About halfway.
About halfway? Okay.
Other half goes into the bell housing. These pins are both the same. They're 12 millimeter diameter, 16 millimeter long. All right, so now we have the dowel pins out of here. That's all there is. The front bearing's out, dowel pins are out. Now it's just a big chunk of aluminum. It's ready to go to the wash. I don't know if you want to zoom in, but you can kind of see all the metal sludge in here. And look at that. It's not just gear oil.
Oh, yeah.
That's what you're hoping to not see when you drain your oil.
Yeah, you could totally see all the little metal bits in there.
Now we're going to move on to the rear housing. So there's our roll pin that we knocked out earlier in the video from the reverse interlock, which is this piece right here.
That just pulls out?
Yeah, kind of. So there's the reverse interlock. Now we're gonna remove the oil tube. To do that, we're just gonna kind of bump up on it with the heel bar. So there's the oil tube. Ooh, look at that, yummy. All that metal in there. That's just solid metal.
So that just slides into a hole on the inside of the case.
It slides in right there.
Okay.
We like to remove everything we can. This piece here is the guide for the reverse idler gear, which is this piece right here. Rides down in this pocket. Never been successful taking that out. Pretty sure that you'll destroy it if you try to take it out. So unfortunately, we just leave that in. One other thing that we have to do here, well, 2 other things. We have to get the rear seal out, which we could have done before we took the case off, but it's a little easier to do right now. And then we also need to get this bearing out of here. And there's kind of a stubborn snap ring. It's just not a lot of fun. This is the easiest version of it, but still not that fun. So we're gonna use 2 screwdrivers. We're gonna just kind of pry that out like that. Hopefully I don't struggle too much. So we got a screwdriver behind it. That's the end of the snap ring right there. And I've got that far back. So now when I twist the screwdriver, I'm gonna use this bent pick to pick up on the snap ring. I have this other screwdriver prying it away, and I'm gonna just reach under here with the bent pick and start working it up. And we'll get that right there, and then we can just pull that snap ring out. So now we're gonna use a big flat screwdriver to knock the rear seal out. That's it.
So this is the seal he just knocked out from the other side using that long flathead screwdriver.
Right, and the reason that I do it that way is because this is an aluminum housing. Look, you can even see that somebody's already pulled a seal. Kind of hard to see, but there's like a groove right there. And that's what happens when you use like a heel bar to pull a seal out. The corners of the tool will drag on the aluminum and make a groove that could potentially cause an oil leak. So I prefer to just leave it in, flip it over, and knock it straight out with a flat screwdriver. Now we're gonna use that same screwdriver the other way, and we're gonna knock that bearing race out that we just took the snap ring off of. So on this one, there's a lip right there that we can catch the screwdriver on and drive it out from the back. The later model transmissions, that race gets bigger, and there's no lip, so it's a lot harder to get out.
And that looked to me, Nick, that you didn't use much force at all to knock that out. That was pretty easy.
No, it came out pretty easy. And there's that race. This is an L28-3, and the later version is an L28-4, which has a lot thinner wall on this race, and so it doesn't leave anything to put the screwdriver on, so you just got to kind of fight it out. And this is replaced with the rebuild. Okay, so now we're done with the rear case, other than I guess we can peel this gasket out of the way here.
And when you put the cases back together, are you using paper gasket or you use all RTV?
We use all RTV, and I think it's way better that way. For this transmission, we do sell a paper gasket kit that's genuine Toyota for guys that want to go back with gaskets, but I don't use them. So that's it for the rear case. We've got the bearing out, we've got the reverse interlock out, we got the oil tube, the plungers, the rear seal, everything's done. This is just a big chunk of aluminum and it's ready to go to the wash. All right, here we go. Let's get all this stuff apart. We're gonna start with the forks. This is the early version of these before they used Loctite. Later version uses Loctite on this bolt, but this is the early version. So there's this little metal tab. It's part of this whole washer assembly right here, and it's bent over to keep that bolt from coming out. So we'll just use a little flat screwdriver, a chisel or whatever, and just bend that or break it off. And there's another one here. We're gonna get that one while we're at it. And a lot of times they do break off, but we don't care because we don't want to.
Are you just going to use Loctite when you go back together?
Yeah. Yeah, see, they both broke.
Both of them broke, okay.
So for anybody that wants to reuse them, you still can. One side broke off, but there's another side that's not been bent, so you can simply flip it over if you wanted to retain that, but Loctite works great. 12 millimeter bolts here and here. We're going to go ahead and take those out. So see there, if you wanted to reuse it, you could. You still got one good tab, and it's on both of them. These are also a special bolt, real small thread, and they have that big shoulder on them. There's two of those.
So if you didn't use that retainer, you're not going to have to worry that the bolt is going to go in too deep. It's not going to do anything.
And in 1989, Toyota decided Loctite was okay, and they've been doing it ever since. So.
And it's the same size bolt?
Yeah, same exact bolt.
Okay.
So I don't see why it's any different for us. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, we want to get all the forks and rails out of here. So now we're going to remove all these clips. One here, one here. I think that's it. We're going to use the Yota1 14 millimeter C-clip remover tool. Oh, look, we have a part number. Part number T121771. Super awesome tool.
And you obviously sell those.
We do sell them. You can get them on our website. We're going to just start with this front clip here, and these things like to go flying, so we're just going to kind of build a rag up right there, and we're going to turn that into where we can see the open. Can you zoom in on that? You see the opening of that C-clip? If you have one of these, it's really easy. You just put it on there and hit it with a dead blow. If you don't, you would use 2 equal length flat screwdrivers like that, and you could knock that clip off of there. Takes a few more tries if you're using the screwdrivers. That's why we like this. Pops right off. And there's our snap ring. Okay, now we're gonna pull the forks and the rails and the interlock assembly out. We've just got our snap rings out and these 2 fork bolts out. So we don't really mark any of this stuff anymore because we know it now, but for those of you that don't, I would suggest you marking stuff. I would say the forward direction. A lot of guys will use a file and put a little notch on the forward direction of the forks, and the same thing with the sliders. We're just gonna use this little pencil Dremel that's really, really loud. So here we go.
So you mark the forward side of each of those pieces so you can't flip them and get them on backwards, because you actually could get them on backwards, correct?
Well, no, you wouldn't get the bolt through. These sliders, you could put them on backwards. So this is more just so you don't have to sit there and figure it out. You can just look at the fork and you know exactly where it goes. Because these 2 sliders that the forks engage with, this one is smaller than this one. So you can't mix up the forks. And now you have the sliders marked, so you shouldn't mix up which direction they go. And you got the forks marked, so you wouldn't have to think about which direction they go. It just makes the reassembly go a little quicker and smoother.
Gotcha.
Now we're gonna start taking the rails out. But look what we got here. This rail is stuck. It doesn't want to come out. What that is that's the interlock system, which is pins in between these rails down in the center plate. That's the interlock system doing its job. It won't let this fork move because it's not truly in neutral. Even though it looks like it's truly in neutral, it's really not. And what it is this reverse gear has migrated a little bit forward. So if we simply pull that gear, see, it didn't move very much, but if we hold that gear forward, now we can slide that rail out. This top rail is the 1-2 shift rail. There's no pins in it. There's nothing special. We just slide it out. Now we can grab the fork, put these in the wash. So now we're on to the 3-4 fork, which is the center fork in the assembly. There's gonna be an interlock pin down in there.
That sucker's long. That's longer than what we saw like in the R150F, right?
Yeah, this is the hot dog.
It's the hot dog.
Yep.
Key balsa.
Now we're gonna pull the 3-4 rail out, but there's a pin inside of this rail that wants to fall out, and it's very easy to get lost. It's probably the #1 small part that people call me about. To prevent it from getting lost, the easiest way to do it is to pull that rail out with the transmission laying on its side, because now that pin is horizontal instead of vertical. If we pull it out with the transmission right side up and the pin's vertical, it's gonna slide out and it could very easily get lost. So by being ready for it and putting the transmission on its side, you'll see that when we pull this out, you can see that pin right there. See that little pin right there through the rail? So we're gonna go ahead and slide this whole rail out, and we're gonna leave it flat. That way it doesn't slide out, and then it'll fall right out in our hand. And there's that little pill. And that pill goes in that hole in the 3-4 shift rail.
It's easy to see, yeah, if you're tearing it apart, then it drops on your bench and then goes flying. You're never gonna find it.
You won't even know you're missing it.
Yeah.
Now to make it easy, we're gonna stand this back up and turn it around. This hole that the interlock assembly's in gets small down there, and my magnet doesn't fit. I can only grab that top hot dog. So there's one more I gotta get, and I have to get it right through the front, but it's pretty easy. I just stick my magnet in there and I can pull that thing right out.
And that one is clearly shorter than the upper one, right?
Yes. You can see the distance between these holes and the distance between those holes. That's why that one's so long and this one's so short. Now we've got that pill out of there. The next thing that we're gonna do is take out this 14mm bolt that holds this flat tab here, which is holding these two shafts in place. So we're gonna take this bolt out, remove the bolt, pull that tab out of the way. That's what you got.
And that tab, what did it go underneath?
Yeah, there's a notch in this shaft, and there's also a notch in that shaft. And that tab, it slides into those notches and retains those two shafts. So now we're gonna take the roll pin out of the 5th gear fork. Same roll pin that we took out earlier in the reverse interlock.
You put a magnet on there to catch it?
Yeah, I don't feel like looking for it. It's just so much easier. There's only 2 roll pins in this transmission, and they're both the same. They're 22.5mm long. I believe they're 5mm ID. They might be 6, I'm not sure, but they're 22.5mm long. There's 2, and they're both the same. You don't have to worry about mixing them up. Now we've got the roll pin out, the lock tabs out of the way. We're gonna roll this back on its side, and the first shaft we're gonna take out is this, and there's gonna be a little pill, another one. The last one is gonna be hiding in there. You can see it right down in there. See that last pill hiding down in there?
Yep.
So now we're gonna remove that pill with our trusty magnet.
That's an even shorter one, huh?
Yep, even shorter. I'll cover the dimensions of these on the assembly video. Okay, now with that out of the way, we can pull this rail out. And that's gonna give us the 5th gear fork, which is always full of metal. Even when the units didn't fail, there's always a little pocket of metal hiding right there. This rail, and now we can also get our reverse pivot, and we can get our reverse shaft, as well as the reverse gear, all in one shot. Okay, now we have a couple snap rings to deal with. We need to pull the transfer case coupling off, You could pull this coupling off before you take that snap ring out, but I like to just get it out of the way and get it done. That way when the puller's in my hand, I can just move on and pull everything I need to pull. So 2 equal length flat screwdrivers. We had a pile of rags underneath it as a cushion, so when the snap ring flies off, it doesn't hit the bench and end up who the hell knows where.
There it is.
Okay, now we're gonna go after this snap ring right here. It's on this rear countershaft bearing. Oh, and it's stubborn, so. We're trying to get this snap ring off, but it's really tight. It doesn't want to come off. I could make it come off, but I'll destroy the snap ring. So rather than doing that, we're gonna use this little homemade tool. It's actually made out of a couple old W56 parts. We're gonna put that on there, and we're gonna give this a tap, and we're trying to drive that bearing further on to free up that snap ring. And see there, all of a sudden that snap ring wants to come off. It's kind of a stubborn one. It's pretty thick and really small. Here we go. We're gonna disassemble the back half of this W56B. So we got some stuff that we have to pull off. One quick thing I'll talk about and show you is we're gonna use this posi lock puller. Timmy will find you the exact model. I think it's a TM2, but that might be the other one we use. Anyway, this is available on Amazon. This is the shorter posi lock that you can use on the 4-wheel drive. If you're doing a W55 or W46, whatever 2-wheel drive, then you need this monster. And that one's expensive. Hopefully you don't have to buy one of these. But for a 4-wheel drive, we're gonna use this one. One quick thing about this, usually when you use a puller like this on a shaft, see the dimple in the end of that shaft? Well, that works really good like that, and that's typical stuff. But this transmission only, I don't know why, but this is another W56 shaft, and see there's no dimple on it. You can see that dent, that's from that puller, but if these transmissions haven't been rebuilt, there won't be anything there. And this hole here is pretty big, and so it's really common that the puller wants to kick sideways, and it's really frustrating. So we just machined this little aluminum slug that fits in there kind of loose, good enough, and then it also fits around that, so that takes up the slack so we can pull this sleeve off easier.
Do you think somebody could maybe use a socket? Would that work, or probably not?
You know, I'm sure you could. Let's give them the dimensions of this real quick to save people some energy. Okay, so this little piece has an overall diameter of just under 1 inch. It has an inner diameter of 680 thousandths, and it's 1 inch 900 long. I don't think the length is very critical. Okay, so put the adapter in there, slide the puller over it, and we're gonna bite down on that step. Even with the snap ring out of the way, we can't really get all the way behind it, but they gave us a nice step right there to grab. So we're gonna tighten our puller up on that. Get it good and tight. There we go, let's pull it off.
Now that part that you took off, could you accidentally put that on backwards, you think?
Yeah, you could. See how the splines don't come all the way to the end?
Oh, okay.
And then there's a step and a line on the back. It goes on that way with the step and the line facing away. Now I want to go after 5th gear and this bearing. Now this is a little risky. When we pull this gear like this, we don't really have a lot of choice, but I really hate pulling gears where the puller fingers are touching the teeth. But luckily on these, you see how that gear, the corners are kind of knocked off a little bit. That's factory, and that makes it really nice. And you can see like these aren't, but those are. It's almost like they knew we were gonna use a puller on this, so they went ahead and got rid of that little point.
Because if that little point was there, they're gonna be more likely to chip off when you put that pressure from the puller.
Absolutely, and it could happen at any time. It's probably 1 in 10 we pull this off and we'll break a tooth. But luckily 5th gear sets are available here at Yota1. They're in stock all the time. So if you mess up your 5th gear, it can be replaced. So here we don't have a way to grab this bearing very well. We would only be grabbing the outer cage, and it's just simply not gonna come off. So we're gonna pull on this gear, and we're gonna use this gear to pull the bearing off. You can see that our puller put a little dimple right there, which is gonna come in handy again. I'm gonna shoot to get the tip of the puller back in that little dimple just to keep everything as perfect as I can. And I don't know if you can see it on the camera or not, but that little dimple, it didn't end up perfectly in the middle, but it's pretty close.
Yeah, and so that's going to help the shaft of the puller from walking off that shaft.
If the tip of the puller was offset here, then the whole puller body is going to be offset, and it's just not going to work right. Those two parts need to be pulled off nice and straight. So I've got the puller set up to where it's not really touching this back edge here. I could go a lot tighter with that, but now I'm pushing this plane here against the teeth. So I've got it backed off just slightly from that where there's a little bit of room, but I got a lot of bite on that gear, and that's the proper way to set that up. And now that that's there, we're gonna line up that point right there in that hole, and now we're ready to pull that.
So you're using a pretty powerful 1/2-inch drive Milwaukee gun, and that took quite a bit of force to get that sucker off.
Yeah, but I'm on 1 bar of battery too, so I think it made it look a little worse than it is. It is very tight, but we really need to change this battery.
Okay, get a new battery on there.
Yeah, look at that. Now we're in business.
All right, fully charged M18 battery.
Okay, so now these are loose. We've pulled them off. Let's see. We did not damage the gear. That's great. No broken teeth. This bearing is going to get replaced. Okay, so now we need to pull this bearing off. This gear idles, so it's not pressed on, but this bearing is, and there's also a thrust plate behind this bearing that's also pretty stubborn. We could just pull this bearing off, but look, at least my puller, you guys may have something fancier, but my puller won't get in there. So I could use heel bars to take that bearing off. I've done it that way a lot, but this is a pretty light press, and I don't really want to grab the gear to pull, but in this situation, this bearing is a pretty light press, and the thrust plate behind it is a very light press. So we're going to go ahead and just grab the whole gear and pull this whole assembly off. Remember, we've already removed that snap ring.
And again, are you going to keep the puller a little bit loose so it's not hitting the teeth?
I am.
Yeah, so you're keeping the tines of the puller a little bit loose so they're not dragging right up against the teeth.
Yep. Now we've got our bearing, and that plate was suctioned to the bearing, so this gets retained. It's the same on both sides. It's just a thrust plate for 5th gear right there. So you're gonna retain this, dispose of this bearing. Now inside of 5th gear, we have the split bearing. That's going to be replaced as needed. We do have them. If you need them, we've got them. They're usually pretty good. They have a pretty easy life, and they're okay to reuse as long as they're in good shape. Can't really tell on these, but once they come out of the wash, we'll see a lot more. They look good so far, but we'll see when they come out of the wash.
But in your experience, most of the time they're okay?
Yep. And again here, no chipped teeth. We didn't damage that gear pulling it off. All right, 5th gear's out of the way. Now we got a couple things here that are easy to take off. Here's our 5th gear Syncro. That just pulls right out. If you're reusing these, it's up to you. This is the only Syncro that's this size, so it's pretty hard to mix up. So keep it, get rid of it, whatever you want to do.
On all your rebuilds, you replace them, correct?
Always replace Syncros. Okay, the next thing is there's this little washer right here. This is gonna get reused. It's just a little spacer. It's like a thrust washer. Really what it's for is to keep the 5th gear thrust off of that snap ring right there.
Is that side specific, or you could reverse it?
No, this is the same both ways.
Okay.
So here we go. We're going after this snap ring right here, just like all the other ones.
The 2 equal length screwdriver trick?
Yep. I wish I had some fancier screwdrivers. Those are pretty sad, but
They work.
I've been using them, these things, for 10 years. There's our snap ring. Now we're in here with the 5th gear hub and synchro keys and slider. We could just pull that thing off, but we're putting a bunch of pressure on the spring, so we don't want to do that. We're just gonna get a little pick, and we're gonna get in here and we're gonna pick that spring out of the way, real easy. Pull that off, and now we can pull that slider off way easier. And
So you're basically just doing that so you don't put any undue force on that spring.
Yeah. And then now we can grab, usually these keys will fall out. These ones didn't. So these 3 keys came out of these 3 notches in the hub. We're gonna find 6 more of these keys as we move on, but those other keys are gonna be about double the width of these, so pretty hard to mix them up. These little narrow keys go back here. Same with this spring. There's gonna be 4 more of these, 5 more actually. These are the smallest of the 2. Okay, so now we're gonna pull off this 5th gear hub. It has this thin metal plate behind it, so we don't really wanna put the puller teeth on that. Sometimes it happens, we try not to. If it gets bent, we have a little press jig thing that we've made to straighten it back out, so it's not the end of the world. But there is a little bit of the hub sticking up, so if you're patient, you can get the puller bit down on it without the jaws being on that plate. And with these hubs, they can be kind of brittle, so I really don't recommend, like I wouldn't want to pull a hub right next to one of those key grooves. My puller has 3 jaws and there's 3 grooves in almost every hub. I like to split the difference, put it right in the middle. I feel like that's where it's the strongest. And the way I do this is just hook 2 of the teeth right where I want them. And I got this one here, I'm keeping a little bit of pressure on it. And with my other hand, I can just tighten the puller up and line it up.
So just to where it's grabbing the edge of the hub and not that plate behind it.
So now we've got the puller teeth opposite of the groove and it's tight and we're not smashing that plate. So now you can see how I had it set up where it's tight. The face of the teeth are pushing up against that plate. But we can also see some damage probably from a part of that input bearing came back here and look how it chewed up that hub.
Yeah, that thing's mangled.
Yeah, that hub would probably still work. A lot of that damage is on this metal plate and we can probably fix it. We'll see. This hub is very hard to get.
Can you get the plates though or no?
Nope. You don't absolutely have to do this, but we want to take this plate off because really we just want to get everything nice and clean, and it's not that big of a deal for us to take it off, clean it, and reinstall it. Here we want to see if we can't salvage this piece. For the most part, that hub is in good shape. I don't know if we'll be able to or not, but I think a lot of that damage is on this metal plate. All the metal plate's there for is just so the synchros don't pop out. So as long as the plate is in good shape right behind those notches, that's really all it's there for. So I'd rather not use this piece, but they're hard to get, so we'll see if we can salvage it. So to take it off, we're just gonna use a flat screwdriver and we're just gonna work around and keep going, and it'll lift a little bit each time. Just keep going. This one might be harder than normal because of that damage. Okay, it came off. Now we got the plate off, and a lot of the damage is on the plate, but a good amount of it is on the hub too, so I really don't think we're gonna reuse this.
And so when you say it's difficult to get, does that mean you got to get it from another used one because
Yes.
Toyota doesn't sell it?
No, it's discontinued. No aftermarket source for it.
Bummer.
Yep. Okay, so one last thing. Remember the little synchro spring that we pulled out from this side? Well, there's another one right there, and we want that thing out of there. And we'll go ahead and clean this and see what happens. Okay, so the next thing that we're after is this reverse gear. So it's got a big thick snap ring on it right there. Sometimes it's really stubborn. These gears sometimes are very, very hard to get off, and sometimes they slide right off. You can usually tell by how tight that snap ring is. If the snap ring is really tight, that means that the gear is not that tight on the spline. So it's actually good when that snap ring's tight. It means that this is probably gonna be a lot easier to do. So let's see if it's tight. It's semi-tight. All right, so it doesn't really want to come off that easy. So I'm gonna try to slide this gear further on to make that snap ring looser. I have this homemade tool here that's larger than the snap ring. So I'm just gonna give it a hit. Okay, let's see if it got any looser. It did, so we got it. Big, thick snap ring. Okay, so now we're gonna try to pull this gear off. We got the snap ring out of the way. We're really hoping that it comes off with these 2 heel bars. Let's see. There's a good spot to pry. See where that screw is right there? That's a really good spot to put your pry bar because that plate bulges out, so it gives you pretty good leverage right there. And there's the same on this side. So right there on top of the screws. And we're gonna push this thing up against that block and pray. It's tight, but it's coming. Okay, so we've been prying on the back side of the gear, but now if you look, we've got it out far enough that we can actually get all the way behind, right at the splines down in there. So now that makes it a lot easier to get off, and our pry bar actually will get behind that now. Okay, so that was kind of normal, what you would expect with this gear. They're usually pretty tight like that, but sometimes they're 5 times that tight, and you have to use the big puller, not this puller, the big one. And it's so big that it really doesn't want to get behind that gear, so we've modified the jaws on that to be able to slide in there, because this gear is so close to that plate, it just doesn't leave room to grab it. So for all you guys that are building one of these, I really hope that you get that gear off without too much struggle.
Put a prayer into the gear gods.
Yep. Now we can put our puller away. Okay, so now we're gonna take off this center bearing retainer. It's Torx, they're T40, same deal. These really like to strip, so we're gonna use our impact driver again. Here we go.
How many of them are there?
There's 4 of them.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're gonna zap out those 4 bolts. 4 bolts, all the same. And now our center bearing retainer will pull off. We've got the center bearing retainer out of the way. We got one more thing to do before we pull the shafts out of this center plate, which is take off this snap ring on the main shaft center bearing. Okay, so now we're ready to take both shafts out of the center plate. We can't just pull the countershaft out. Usually the front of it would get hung up on the bearing. In this situation, the bearing is gone, so it wouldn't get hung up on it. But still, even right here, see this gear overlaps that engagement tooth right there. So the countershaft won't just come straight out. We probably could just take it out without pulling the main shaft, but normally you wouldn't be able to do that. So to me, the easiest way to do it without dropping anything is to hang the plate off the bench like that, and then I can just tap back and forth and it'll do that. Now I can slide the
center plate off.
Slide the center plate off, set that on the bench, and now we have our 2 shafts loose. We can take the input shaft out as well. Usually that bearing will fall out. There's our pocket bearing. So we've got our input shaft, main shaft, our counter shaft, and our center plate. So we have this bearing race right here that needs to come out. A lot of times it'll just push right out, just like this one will. Sometimes you have to knock it out, but
and you're replacing that part, right?
yeah. That one's kind of in between. Probably would have been easier to knock it out, but anyway, that's that. Don't need to save this snap ring. That snap ring comes on the new bearing. This part can be discarded. We want to surface this center plate just like everything else, so we need to get rid of these 2 dowel pins. There's the 2 also on the other side, so we're going to go ahead and get rid of those. If you're not surfacing the center plate, there's really no reason to pull those dowel pins out of the way. Okay, so now we've got the 2 dowel pins out of the center plate, which for those of you that are doing it, they are the same as the 2 that we pulled from the front case, which was a 12 millimeter diameter by 16 millimeter long. So we have 2 of them out, and now we're gonna pull these other 2, but we're gonna do those different. The easy way to do that is just to put that rag over that hole, and then we'll line that up. Okay, now we got our other 2 dowel pins, and that's all there is to do with the center plate. We're done with it now. So now we're gonna process the counter shaft. There's a couple things that we gotta look at. First thing, there's this bearing here, and it's split. So I'm gonna just pop it off, and then you'll see it makes more sense. It comes apart real easy. You just kind of crack it open, and that's that. That's the center counter shaft bearing. It's common to have damage on the shaft right there. This one's a little foggy, but I think it'll be okay. We'll put that in the shaft polisher, and I bet you that thing looks beautiful when we're done with it. So we're good there. We can move on. This bearing gets replaced, so it can be discarded. Okay, now the next thing, we're gonna just look at the wear on all these gears. So this transmission had a massive input bearing failure, and the input shaft I can see from right here is damaged. So this input shaft rides with the front of the counter. So when this shaft gets damaged, pretty common that this gear right here, which this is all one piece, but this gear in particular will get damaged. This one to me doesn't look damaged. It actually looks pretty good. So we'll see, we'll give it a further inspection when we get it out of the wash. But for right now, I think there's a possibility that we'll reuse this shaft. And why that's important is because if I know the shaft is damaged, I'm not gonna waste my time pulling that bearing off of there. I would still try to save the snap ring, but I'm not gonna go through all the work to save the bearing if I'm throwing the shaft away.
Does Toyota sell these countershafts still?
They do not, but these are readily available aftermarket. We have them in stock at all times. Same with the input shaft.
Oh, so aftermarket, a company makes them.
Aftermarket only, yeah, no OE parts. Okay, so now we're gonna put it in my super fancy custom box that everybody wants to buy. We don't have those available. So snap ring pliers, we're gonna go after the snap ring right here. It's a little tight. I'll drive that thing down a little bit. When I take these snap rings off, I try to not kill them, you know, I try to just open the snap ring just barely enough to slide over the shaft. Otherwise, man, you're gonna be buying a bunch of snap rings.
Yeah, you're gonna stretch it out. It's gonna be like a hot dog in the hallway.
That's right.
Corn dog in the Astrodome.
Okay, so now we're gonna pull this off. Same deal like one of the last bearings we just talked about. The puller teeth don't really fit very well underneath that. And this is a really light press. So we just use heel bars. We have a few different versions of them. One of the guys that tears down transmissions here really likes to use these. These are a tire iron 16-inch small tire mount dismount iron. Look, made in America even.
America.
And these have this cool little standoff. So what we're trying to do is just not roll a bar down to the point where the back of the bar is gonna chip a tooth out here. These are great for that because of that special shape, but I don't really care for these, but I know a lot of guys like them. I like these, but these will, before that bearing comes off, the back of the heel will be on that. So here's the way I do it. I go ahead and start it, and I'm watching it, and right about there, I'm gonna stop. The back of that bar is about to touch the tip of the tooth, but it has not touched it. So once I get the bearing that far off, I use this old wore out Syncro ring, and I put it on there, and then I pry against that. And that works really good for me.
Gotcha.
Okay, so now we've got the bearing off, and this is 3-piece. So there's this spacer that goes on first back there, and then you have the actual cylindrical bearing, and then you have the center race. So all three of those, you need to make sure to get that off. Sometimes these are stuck on there and they take a little effort to get off. But anyway, that's the complete bearing. And that's it for our counter shaft. That's ready to go to the wash. Okay, so now we're moving on to the input shaft. We have the pilot bearing that was in here. So if we're thinking that we're gonna save this shaft, which this one is not gonna be saved, and we'll show you why. But one of the main things you wanna look for is what's this bearing surface in here look like? If this is dark at all in there, you probably don't wanna use the shaft, which this one's a tiny bit dark, but I bet you after it comes out of the wash, that part of the shaft would look pretty good. Then the next thing we're gonna look at is this cone where the Syncro rides. And this one looks okay. After it came out of the wash, it was cleaned up. I bet that would be okay. Then we move on to the engagement teeth right here. They look pretty good. We've got decent sharp corners there. The tips aren't too ground down. Those all look pretty good. So now let's move on to the gear itself. So the gear actually looks pretty good when you're looking at it from the side, but since there was an input bearing failure, you can see this is all chewed up right here.
Oh yeah, you could see it.
Yeah, and so you might say, well, that's not really important, but to me it is, because the engagement on this is all the way out. And if you look, there's edges and burrs right there. So you run this shaft in a transmission and this thing is gonna howl like crazy and you're gonna have an upset customer. So this shaft goes in the garbage on that right there. Moving past that, the next thing that you would look for is the pilot tip right here. Pretty common that these things are just totally chewed up. This one actually looks really cherry. If it wasn't for that damage right there on the face of that gear, we would be reusing this shaft. Which, you know, I'm kind of glad we're not, because then I'd have to pull that center race out of there. And with the way that thing's rounded, that's a pain in the butt.
Yep.
So luckily we get to throw this one in the garbage. Okay, so the input shaft that we actually pulled out of that transmission, the input bearing was blown up and the outer race was loose. So we didn't get a chance to show you how to remove that bearing. Here we're gonna just show you, this is just an old shaft that we put a bearing on so we can show you how to take it off. We're gonna use a tool like this, put it around the bearing, go to the press. There's rags in here so the shaft can fall without getting damaged. And it's that simple.
So you just used a big bearing splitter.
Yep.
Okay.
That's actually the small bearing splitter.
Yeah, small. But for a lot of people, they don't have that size. They have smaller ones, but
yeah.
Okay, but that's easy. All right.
We're on to the key piece here. So this is the main shaft. We're gonna go ahead and stack it up in here so it can show you better. And right at the top, we have our 4th gear synchro, which, what do you know? It's stuck. It's because of that input bearing failure. Oh, and it's stuck in there pretty good. It should have just fallen right out. But let's see what happened to it. So here's the synchro that came out of here. And see these angled cuts right here? And it's like that all the way around. This is also an old synchro. That's what it's supposed to look like. See how it doesn't have those grooves?
Oh, so that was just chewed up.
Yeah, so what was happening there, when this bearing failed, that bearing is what's responsible for keeping these two shafts at the correct distance apart. Because unlike all other gears, there's no thrust surface in here. It depends on the two shafts being held in place by the snap ring on the bearing. So what happens when the input bearing fails is that shaft is allowed to walk out further than it's supposed to. And when it does that, that lets this synchro, where it's supposed to be held down, like this one will go right in probably. Yeah, so it's supposed to be held back and kept from rotating by those synchro keys. Well, when that shaft gets to move that far away, it lets this synchro jump out of its groove and it rotates in there. And this damage is from the synchro keys. Nothing else in here is likely damaged, but the synchro is for sure toast. And that's super common to see when there's an input bearing failure. First thing we're gonna do is take this little spring out, real similar to what you saw us do on 5th gear. That just comes out. Now we can slide this slider off. And then we got our 3 synchro keys. These are wider than the last keys that we took out. There's 3 of them, and there's gonna be 3 more down here behind this slider that are exactly the same as these. Let's see here. We wanna take this snap ring off, but it's pretty tight, so we're gonna drive this hub down a little bit, just like this. Oh look, now the snap ring's loose. Okay, so here we go. We're gonna start to disassemble the main shaft. We're gonna use the Yota1 press sleeves in the big press, so let's do it. So this is a press sleeve that we supply. We use these all the time. So you can see that thing's full of rags. That's to catch the shaft. If you've watched any of our previous videos, I used to not do that, and I would just hold the shaft, and I'm real good at right before it drops, grabbing hold of it and not getting hurt, but this is a lot safer, just filling it full of rags. And the idea here is that we want to slide just past this slider and catch this gear, and we're going to use this gear to pull that bearing off. And you get to watch us do it. We're all set up there, and you can see we're out on the tips of these teeth here, which we really don't like, and we talked about it, how it's not a good idea. But in this situation, we're out on the tip of every single tooth on that gear, so the likelihood of any of those getting damaged is pretty low. Here we go. So now we've got that rear main shaft bearing off and our first gear. And here's our first gear thrust bearing retainer and the rear bearing. This bearing is gonna get replaced, so it gets discarded. We're gonna save these 2 pieces. They'll go in the wash. We'll go back to the bench with this. Now we're back at the bench. Here's our first gear needle bearing. That's gonna go in the wash. There's our first gear Syncro. That's going to get discarded. This needle bearing can usually be reused. Now we got a couple things going on here. The first thing is, see this ball right here? That's a ball to keep the first gear thrust from twisting. So that ball rides in that groove and keeps this thrust from moving. So
it just popped out.
Yeah, it usually doesn't, but it's real important to get that ball out of there. If you forget to take that ball out when you press this hub off, you're highly likely going to crack this hub, and that piece is also not available. Don't forget to take the ball out. Now the next thing we're going to do is take out this Syncro key snap ring. You've seen us do it a few other times. No different here. Now we can slide this slider off. Grab our 3 keys. These are the same exact keys that you just watched us pull. All that stuff gets reused. That all goes in the wash.
Something I want to say that we didn't say earlier is that he's got a hole in the bench here that the shaft is able to go into. So the box was on top of this hole, and that's why the shaft was able to go down as far, because there's a hole in the bench. So I just wanted to make that clear so you're not confused. Like, how was he able to do that? There's a hole in the bench.
Okay, so here we go back to the press. Now we're using the smaller sleeve, and we're gonna grab second gear and use second gear to pull off the first gear, second gear hub.
You sell that sleeve too?
We do. We have the sleeve kits available individual or in a kit of 3 if you want to save a few bucks. So here we go. Let's pull off the 1-2 hub. Okay, back to the bench. The 1-2 hub is loose. We haven't taken it off yet, so we haven't risked getting it out of direction. This is not directional. You can put it on either way. Not all hubs are like that. Most of them are directional. This one just happens to not be. So just a good habit is to mark this, and I usually mark everything forward facing. And I could pull this off and mark the front of it, but I like to just carve an R, and that's just the way I do 1-2 hubs in all these transmissions. It's one of the only marks I ever put on a transmission that is not forward facing. So now we've got that marked, it's loose, we can pull it off. There's the other Syncro spring. That's it. This is ready for the wash. All right, now we're at second gear. This is the second gear Syncro. We can take that off. Now we can take second gear off, as well as the second gear needle roller bearing, which is the same as the first gear needle roller bearing. These are ready to go in the wash. Now the last thing is to pull off third gear and the 3-4 hub. So we're gonna do that on this other press. I use this small piece just because I've used it forever. In our kit with the press sleeves, the tool does not look like this. It's much taller, and I think that'll work a lot better for a lot of people. That's why we make that so tall. I have this box, and the way my press is set up, I just don't need it. And in fact, I can't use it because this is a small press, and I could use the big press and use the big pipe, but I have this small press and I love using it. So I just have this, and I've been using it forever, and I'm gonna keep doing it. But there we go, that goes in there like that. We already took that snap ring off, so if you haven't, make sure you do before you start pressing on it. So there we go. Take the shaft out. That shaft is done. So what we have here is third gear, our third gear Syncro, and our hub. This hub is hard to mix up. There's a thrust surface on this side, and there's not a thrust surface on the front side. So if you need to mark it, go ahead, but it wouldn't allow you to install it backwards. It'd let you try, but it wouldn't work. So we got these 2 things going in the wash, or well, the gear going in the wash and the Syncro going in the scrap. The last thing is to pull that last spring out of there. Those 2 things go in the wash. Our main shaft goes in the wash, and you'll notice real quick, third gear on early W56s uses this bushing. There's no bearing in there. It just rides on the shaft. The later model, 92 and up, there actually is a split bearing that goes there, and that bushing is not like that.
The beauty of having your transmission rebuilt at Yota1 is all of these parts that were disassembled are gonna go right in that parts washer, and get super clean. Trying to get things super clean with just using brake cleaner or some type of solvent and a solvent tank, you'll get them pretty clean, but you're not going to get them as clean as this parts washer is going to get them. After the parts come out of the parts washer, they get a thorough inspection and they're going to reuse the parts that they can reuse. If they see any damage to the shafts or the gears, those will get replaced. And then obviously all the other wear parts like the bearings and seals and synchros are going to be replaced regardless. That's part of a normal rebuild. For the cases and the center plate, those are going to be bead blasted and then they're going to be resurfaced on their belt sander to get a nice even mating surface when they put everything back together so there's no leaks. Here's an example of the bead blasting they do for the cases and the center plate. Here's an example of how they resurface the cases, the center plate, and the front bearing retainer. It doesn't take a whole lot, just get a nice even surface so the mating with the form in place gasket is basically perfect. And that's all there is to it. We have nice even surfaces now. I didn't mention it earlier, but they also polished the main shaft and countershafts before they put the transmission back together. The surfaces they polish are all the bearing surfaces, and Eric's going to do the polishing, the shaft polishing. And that's it. We have a nice polished shaft. The first shaft they polished was the main shaft. Now they're going to do the counter shaft. All right, this is the end of part one. Join us in part two where we put this transmission back together with all the new parts.